Empties. The crisp morning snow had already turned to sludge, and now a dull drizzle fell out of the night sky. Odette continued to throw crumbs to the scrawny pigeon on the ledge, although the air was freezing. It was better than that stifling atmosphere in the room. She could see Serge's reflection in the window, slumped in the armchair, cigarette hanging out of the corner of his mouth, and the ever-present whiskey glass sitting in his hand. "Shut the fucking window," he bellowed. "What the fuck are you trying to do? Warm those filthy birds?" Odette closed the window gently and stared at the distant lights of Paris through the curtain of light rain. The cigarette smoke tickled the back of her throat instantly. With an inaudible sigh, she turned and looked at her husband, now a stranger, sitting mesmerized in front of the television. When Serge had still been working, she'd had the day to herself, but since his retirement 3 years ago, he'd hardly left the apartment. She went over to the coffee table and emptied the ashtray. It looked like one of those anti-cancer advertisements at the pharmacy. But it wasn't the smoking that got her down. If he wanted to smoke himself to death, then that was his affair, and as far as she was concerned, the sooner the better. No, it was the drink. He'd start before lunch and would be slurring his words before he took his afternoon nap, and by dinner time he'd become abusive. It was at this time of day that Odette was so grateful that the apartment below theirs, which was in a sad state of repair, was permanently empty. In fact, they all were. The whole place should have been pulled down years ago. The decrepit 5-story suburban building they lived in had no lift, but strangely enough it still had a concierge, if that's what you could call the dreadful harridan who lurked in her quarters downstairs, peering at every movement from behind her lace curtains. Madame Therese was more like an obese prison warden. What little mail they received underwent thorough inspection, and when Odette walked past her window she could feel the weasel eyes following her. On a couple of occasions Odette had come home to find Madame Therese snooping around on the 5th-floor landing, like a hugely overweight bulldog on the scent of something. She claimed she could smell gas, and had come to investigate. Then she would begrudgingly return to her lodge, shaking her head in mumbled disapproval of some, as yet, uncommitted misdemeanour. But it was the whiskey that made life so unbearable. On the one occasion when Serge had found the cupboard empty, his frustration and anger had been frightening. He had smashed the empty bottle on the working top and turned on his wife, waving the jagged edges in her ashen face. With trembling hands, Odette had grabbed her purse and big black shopping bag and had rushed out of the apartment without her hat. She had hurried down the dimly lit wooden stairs and out into the cold night, trotting as fast as her old legs would carry her towards the bright lights of the distant supermarket, hoping that she'd make it before they locked the doors. On this occasion she did, but she vowed she would never, ever let it happen again. She could have saved herself the long trek and gone to the small corner shop. Kind Monsieur Georges would wink and slip an extra tomato or orange in her bag and invent discounts for her. How could she explain buying something as expensive as a bottle of whiskey a day to him? That unforgettable evening had been sustenance to Madame Therese. Odette had started to climb back up the stairs in the dark, as stealthily as possible, when suddenly, "Ça va?" came the sickly sweet voice as the lights snapped on. Madame T. had taken note of the heavy breathing and the flushed face. It was like being questioned during the war, and she felt that same dry mouth and trembling in her legs. No, it must never happen again. For economy's sake, she had been used to doing her shopping once a week, but since Serge had retired and things had got so bad, she had to go out every day, as 2 or 3 bottles at a time weighed too much. They also clinked together, and that, if anything, would give her away. And then there was the problem of the empties. Madame T. not only pried into their mail, but nosed around the landing and also knew that the real key to private lives lay in the contents of people's dustbins, and she would regularly go through them. Odette had caught her at it once. but she claimed that she had lost her glasses in there and was looking for them. Likely story. She'd had them on the end of her nose. At first, Odette had taken the empty bottles down one at a time and had thrown them into that wonderful new apparition at the end of the road, the bottle bank. She'd thrilled at the sound of the breaking glass as it hit the other bottles, symbolizing the destruction of the evil it represented. But soon she'd begun to get disapproving looks from the old lady who lived next to it, and who peered through her lace curtains on every visit. So Odette had started looking for alternative places to hide the evidence. Once she'd tried slipping a bottle into a dustbin in another road, but someone had seen her and reprimanded her, pointing out the sticker that clearly stated that no glass was to go in there. She'd had the humiliating experience of fishing it out again, covered in grease and coffee grounds, and carrying it at arm's length like a dead animal back to the bottle bank. Then one day she fell on the stairs and badly sprained her ankle. The sprain was so severe that it had to be put into a plaster, and the doctor forbade her to put any weight on it. The next 2 weeks were indescribable. Serge was forced to stagger every couple of days to the supermarket for his whiskey and cigarettes, but that was as far as his shopping went. Odette ate out of tins, and as for Serge, she supposed he got his nourishment, if you could call it that, from alcohol and peanuts. Odette was feeling weak when she managed at last to drag herself around the apartment again, and it was then, to her horror, that she discovered the backlog of Empties. At least 24 bottles stood in the corner by the dustbin on the landing, lurking like a small, menacing glass army. She stared down at them in terror and thought of Madame T discovering them. The problem had completely slipped her mind. She managed to bring them all in quietly and stash them in the scullery. In time she'd find a solution. But time was not kind, and as time went on, so the collection grew to an industrial quantity. She managed to arrange the bottles in empty cardboard boxes, and pile the boxes one on top of the other. But Madame T was getting suspicious about the arrival of empty boxes, and was regularly climbing all the way up to their apartment on one pretext or another, craning her double chin to see over Odette's shoulder when she'd open the door. One terrible afternoon the truth was nearly discovered when the man from the garage delivered their new gas bottle. Odette hadn't thought of the fact that the kind, burly young man, who so easily hiked the heavy bottles up all those stairs, would need to get into the scullery where the second empty cylinder, which nestled amongst the whiskey bottles, waited to be collected. While he was fixing the new bottle under the cooker, Odette went to the scullery and started the agonizing job of inching the thing towards the door. Although it was empty, the cylinder was too heavy for Odette's spindly frame. Her backache was punishing, but she finally made it to the door just as the gas man appeared. "Here, you shouldn't be doing that, madame," he said, taking the bottle from her as she shut the scullery door with relief. "That's far too heavy." He took the money and swung both empty bottles onto his broad shoulders as if they were feather pillows, smiled at her, and said he hoped her husband would feel better, and trotted down the stairs, whistling the way the carefree do. Odette leant against the door jamb, getting her breath back. Yes, she'd lied about Serge. She was so ashamed that the husband might look weak in the gas man's eyes that she'd told him his back was too bad to lift anything. Little did he know. Then one day it happened. Serge ran out of whiskey again. It was when she was heating up some soup, idly stirring it as she gazed emptily at a dark patch on the wall. The kitchen door suddenly burst open with a noise like a detonation, and Serge, beet red in the face with frightening fiery eyes, filled the doorway with his bulk. Odette went cold and literally froze. "You stupid, dried-out old fool!" he yelled. Lurching and waving the empty bottles, he staggered towards her. Odette tried to avoid the blow, but although it was only a glancing one, it caught her on the side of the head, and as she fell backwards, the saucepan tipped up, dousing the flame and splashing all over Serge's stomach as he lunged forward. He screamed out in pain as the hot liquid penetrated his clothes. Odette was torn between running to help him and getting out of his reach, but when she saw the anger in his bloodshot eyes, she made straight for the kitchen door, grabbed her coat and bag, and was out of the apartment before she could detect the smell of gas. Madame Thérèse watched Odette cross the road and disappear round the corner towards the supermarket. Now was the moment to get to the bottom of all these strange goings-on. Late-night sorties to the supermarket, cardboard boxes, whatever next. It was well her duty to find out what shady affairs were afoot on the 5th floor of her building. After all, it was her responsibility. She started the steep climb on the creaking wooden stairs, but being so overweight, had to stop every 5 steps and hold on to the banisters to get her breath back. On the 2nd floor, the electricity suddenly went off, as it did so often in their quarter. She swore under her laboured breath and went back down to get a candle. By the time she got to the 5th floor landing, she could smell gas, but this time really smell gas. She knocked on the door. No answer. She knocked again and tried the handle. The door wasn't locked. She opened it and just had enough time to see the inanimate Serge on the floor before the slight draught made contact with her flickering candle. Odette heard the explosion all the way from the supermarket. She wondered idly what it could be, but felt quite insensitive. As she made her reluctant way home, she saw 2 fire engines flash by, followed closely by an ambulance. But it wasn't until she came round the corner and looked up that she saw the flaming torch that had once been her home. People were already beginning to gather on the other side of the road as the police car drew up. She joined the crowd. "Some poor bugger won't be needing heating tonight," said a voice behind her. It was a tramp, hunched against the cold, with his collar turned up against the bitter wind. She could see in his face the same resignation she had felt herself when there seemed to be no more hope in life. Odette was suddenly overcome with a weird type of serenity as she watched the firemen busy themselves with hoses and ladders that she somehow knew would be useless. She turned to the tramp and calmly handed him the shopping bag containing the new bottle of whiskey, gave him the contents of her purse, and smiled warmly at him. The astonished man gaped at her in disbelief, and as she walked over to the police to make herself known, she realized, with a tiny smile, that the problem of the Empties had at last been solved.